thanks for coming by Swamp Fox Garage today. Today I'm going to show you just some simple things to check out on your New Edge Mustang as far as idle setup and what you should look out for and not do as far as trying to get your Mustang to idle well. Alright, having bad idle issues. Very common on these New Edge Mustangs, and a lot of it has to do with us, what we've done, or the car setting. But the majority of the time it's because of something that we've done or we've put on the car. Just remember, when you're buying aftermarket parts, you get what you pay for. I personally got so sick of idle issues that you can't really see it, but I went back to underneath here is a factory airbox, and I went back with the stock mass air meter. You don't need to upgrade your mass air meter, and you don't need to upgrade your fuel injectors, which that'll be my next video, is fuel problems. They can get as much power as humanly possible, minus a supercharger, with those 19-pound injectors out of these engines with cams. I've got cams and plus 10 cc pistons, and you don't need to upgrade your mass air meter or any of that until you've gone forced induction, despite what anybody tells you. The main problem I've seen is really cheap throttle bodies, and I hate to give BBK a lot of heat, but the cheap throttle bodies more than likely are a lot of people's issues. I've got an AccuFab. I had a BBK. Once I switched over to a high quality throttle body, a lot of my idle problems went away. The throttle position sensors, they already come preset, and without you having to go into the wiring, if you have a scanner, go into your scanner, make sure your throttle position sensor voltage is between 0.94 and 0.98 volts. The idle screw you should not be messing with at all. Whatever it comes with, or however it comes, it needs to stay. That's why there's a lot of times they'll have a lock nut and then they'll be adjusted. They should just barely be touching the throttle body. You just adjust them and you barely get them to where they're touching the stop. All of your vacuum lines, you need to make sure they're good, nothing's broken. If these come off easy, you need to replace them. I've replaced all these hoses. That's another common idle issue. If you still have the EGR hooked up, it will carbon up your throttle body in a heartbeat, and you get a whole lot less life. All your plugs, you need to put dielectric grease on them. If you can see it, put dielectric grease on it. And after you get a new throttle body or do any kind of intake work, you need to pull the battery off, because, and I may end up getting some heat for this comment, but what I've been told in the past is what happens is the computer overcompensates. If you change something so drastically, the computer can't fix it. It can't compensate for it. So the computer needs to start over. It needs to reboot. So you put a new intake on, you clean fuel injectors, you do anything. I mean, common rule of thumb is to pull the battery cable anyway, and that just lets the computer relearn. And whenever after you've done, and I'm not telling you to go out and drive 100 miles an hour, and this also works if you change altitude and you're having some power issues, idle issues, is you need to, wherever you're at, you need to go and you need to floor it, and you need to go through like first, second, third gear floored twice, especially with a change in altitude, and that should reprogram some of the fuel maps to where you get a little bit more power, especially at higher altitudes. Stick with a Ford Racing plastic intake unless you plan on going 1,000 horsepower. There's no reason to go anything other than the plastic intake. The off-name brand ones that are not Ford Racing, they have been proven to lose a minimum of 20 horsepower for the non-Ford Racing intakes. But back to the idle. All of this stuff you need to check and make sure it's good. The O-ring, where your air temperature sensor is, you need to make sure that's good. And something else with these aftermarket intakes, you can have a kink underneath your main intake tube right here, and not even know it, and it's idling crazy. And keep your mass air meter clean. Do not go in and do not cut the vertical bar that's inside of your mass air meter. That's a big mistake. That messes up the mass air meter. The cold air kits that go around and back inside of your fender well, those are, I'm sorry, but they're no good. Because what happens is the air comes around, it comes up, and it stays, the majority of the airflow stays on the right hand side, and it actually bypasses your meter, so you're not getting proper air readings for the computer. So you need a straight conical filter that goes straight into your mass air meter, because once it gets past your mass air meter, all this, you know, you're improving flow, but other than that, what goes into the air meter is the mass air meter is really what matters. The brand of upper plenum really doesn't matter, but like I was saying before, if you get a cheap throttle body, expect a crappy idle more than likely, because they just, you know, like, this is the AccuFab. Yes, it's a lot of money, but I got tired of crappy idle. Your alternator as well can cause a rough or bad idle from the plug. If you've messed with your alternator, I would say go ahead and rewire the main plug that plugs into the back of it. I've had several alternator issues where the alternator wasn't charging and causing it to, you know, do all kinds of weirdness, and it was because I needed to replace the alternator plug that plugs into the back of the alternator. And also, American Muscle had these Ford PCV valves with the hose. I don't know if they still have them or not, but I would suggest replacing all of this stuff with brand new hosing, all the way over here to the other valve cover. I converted it to a silicone. Anything vacuum wise, I would swap out. Anything rubber, these cars are getting old now, this stuff needs to be replaced. And grounds, I went over in one of my other videos about things to look for, bad things in a Mustang, but you need to do the big three as far as wiring on the Mustang, even if you don't have a stereo, because a lot of the ground straps on these are starting to get bad, and you need to improve all the grounds on them, and, you know, put bigger grounds. Like, you know, I put my battery box in the trunk, and I've got grounds going to the frame, and I've got grounds going to the fender well. You can't really have enough grounds, and this one you can't hardly see, but this is another large gauge ground wire that I have, and it's going to the fender well as well. So you can't have enough grounds. And the ground I've got going from the alternator to the fender well, can't have too many grounds. If it's a bad tuner, you can have very, very bad idle and drivability as well. Torque lockup can be all over the place, and it doesn't run properly. I've gotten heat for saying this in the past, but I keep telling people, go to Ford and ask them about putting LED taillights on these, you know, new Edge Mustangs and the F-150s. if you put all LEDs on the back, you need to put either a resistor in the system, you need to leave your third brake light regular brake light bulbs, because that one wire the computer reads the resistance in the tail lights. It tells the computer, it runs like it's like 1 or 2 volts. It's very, very small voltage. That's why some people that have gotten other brands of LEDs, they hook up their tail lights on these and they light up a little bit. They're always on a little bit. That's because there's always power going to the tail lights. And that tells the computer when you hit the brake lights, that voltage changes. It jumps up and it lets the computer unlock the torque converter. And it will also, in my case, after I did the third brake light, the regular brakes it was fine, but after I did that third brake light, my cruise control stopped working. You could actually hear the torque converter not wanting to lock or unlock properly, and all because of those LED taillights. And that's part of this idle, having the rough bucking idle, especially in traffic. You go to put your foot on the brake and you'll have the air conditioner on. That's where it's the worst, and it'll want to cut off and it'll want to jump and buck. It's because the car is looking for a brake signal and it's not getting a brake signal to unlock or lock up the torque converter properly. So you need to make sure that you do something whenever you do the taillights. What I did in my taillights was it only came with a spot for one socket to plug into the rear brake lights. So I took the extra socket and I put a regular brake light bulb in it, and I zip tied it to the side, and I put high temperature wrap around the bulb so it wouldn't catch on fire. I don't trust those, and I really don't like the resistors. To make them work properly, you really need to get down to bare metal, screw them against bare metal, and use the car as the actual heat sink along with the resistor. And I really did not want to do that. And just after like 5 minutes of holding your foot on the brake, the thing is like 160-70 degrees, and I just did not want it that hot back there. And I felt more comfortable with just putting two light bulbs on either side plugged into the stock harness, just out of the way of the aftermarket LED taillights. So that was my fix for that. But my next video will be on fuel issues, fuel injectors, fuel pump driver, possible things that can happen, that you did or you may have done unexpectedly that could have caused a problem with your fuel system. So I hope we got a little bit across, and hope you guys have a good one.